They remember the bowler hat, the cane, the funny little walk. They laugh at the mustache, the twirl, the pratfall. But behind all that, behind the little tramp, there was a boy who learned to survive before he ever learned to speak. My name is Charlie Chaplin, and this is the part of the story they don't show in black and white. I was born on April 16, 1889, in Walworth, South London. They said it was a rough neighborhood. That always amused me, as if the rest of London had velvet sidewalks. We were poor, but not just in money. Poor in chances. Poor in peace. My father, Charles Chaplin Sr., was a singer with a voice as smooth as gin and a love for drink just as deep. He left before I truly knew him. Died of cirrhosis before I turned 13. My mother, Hannah. Now she was the soul of our home, a singer too, but frail, beautiful and talented, but always teetering at the edge of some invisible cliff. I remember her singing from the stage when I was a boy, her voice trembling, then vanishing, just like our supper sometimes. When her voice failed, so did everything else. We were evicted more times than I could count. My brother Sidney and I would carry our few belongings in knotted cloths from one boarding house to another, always hoping this one might last longer than a week. Sometimes it did. More often it didn't. When I was 7, my mother lost her mind. They called it hysteria, but no word seemed big enough to explain the moment she stared through me like I wasn't there. She was committed to an asylum. The silence she left behind was worse than any scream. Sidney and I were sent to the workhouse, a cold institution with colder bread. They shaved our heads, fed us gruel, measured us like livestock. It was supposed to save us, but what saved me, really saved me, was performance. I found I could make people laugh. I could twist my face, bend my limbs, fall down a flight of stairs and land in applause. Pain turned to timing. Misery became mimicry. I did impressions of men on the street, of drunks in the alleys, of policemen who chased us when we begged for coins. They laughed. And when they laughed, I was no longer invisible. By age 10, I was on stage, just a music hall kid, part of a clog dancing troupe called the 8 Lancashire Lads. We performed for pennies and scraps. But the lights? Oh, the lights. They felt warmer than any hearth. I knew then what I was. Not a boy, not a beggar, but a performer. Sidney helped me get a job with Fred Carnot's vaudeville troupe. It changed everything. Carnot's sketches were clever, and I learned timing like a soldier learns drills. We toured England, then crossed the ocean to America. That first trip, the ocean liner, the skyline of New York, it burned into me. The land of opportunity, they said. I had little more than a battered suitcase and a dream stitched from hunger, but I was ready. In 1913, during one of our American tours, I caught the eye of Max Sennett, Keystone Studios, Slapstick Central. He offered me a role in films, motion pictures, The New Frontier. At first, I hated it. The camera felt cold, the pacing brutal, but I adapted, fast. And then, one day, I put on a tight coat, oversized trousers, floppy shoes, a small mustache, and a bowler hat. The little tramp was born. He just happened. I wasn't trying to create a legend. I was trying to amuse the crew. But once I stepped into that character, the eternal outsider with dignity and rags, I felt something shift. It wasn't just comedy. It was poetry. The audiences responded instantly. Not with polite chuckles, but roars of laughter, sobs, cheers. The tramp was silly, but never stupid. He got knocked down, but always straightened his tie before getting up. He represented all of us, fighting for dignity in a world that didn't care. By 1914, I was directing my own shorts. They gave me control, and I took it like a conductor with a new orchestra. I obsessed over every detail, the timing of a blink, the swing of a cane, the tilt of a hat. I wasn't just making people laugh, I was sculpting emotion out of film, and I didn't stop. The world changed. Europe plunged into war, America marched to industry, but I kept making films. Each reel was a message. A reminder that humanity mattered, that compassion wasn't weakness. My tramp wandered through poverty, through hunger, through loneliness, and still tipped his hat to the world. But behind the smile, I was never far from the child I once was, alone on a workhouse cot, pretending to be someone else. I used that pain. It gave the laughter meaning, and that is where it begins. Not in the studio lots or marble offices, but in the echo of empty stomachs, the creak of secondhand shoes, and the sound of laughter breaking through silence. That is where you'll find me. The rest, as they say, is yet to come. They said silent film was a novelty, a phase that would pass. But I saw something else. A universal language. Words divide us. A gesture, a look, a stumble. These speak to the soul. And in the soul, we are all the same. By the end of the 1910s, the Tramp had become more than a character. He was a phenomenon. People lined up for hours to see my films. Studios offered me contracts larger than anything Hollywood had ever seen. $1 million for 8 films. They said I was mad to demand it. Then even madder when I got it. But with money came pressure. With fame, the gnawing fear of decline. I built my own studio in 1917, a quiet place off La Brea Avenue. There, I could control the light, the lens, the world itself. I surrounded myself with collaborators who shared my obsession for detail, for timing, for truth beneath the farce. Then, in 1919, I joined forces with Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith to form United Artists. A rebellion, they called it. A liberation, I said. We wanted freedom from the whims of moguls in tall buildings, from men who counted profits, but not frames. In those years, I made The Kid. Just saying the title brings a lump to my throat. Jackie Coogan was the boy, bright-eyed and full of spark. The story? A poor man raising an abandoned child. Comedy and heartbreak in the same breath. I poured my past into it. My own hunger, my own loneliness, my mother's collapse. The Kid was not just a film. It was memory, wrapped in celluloid. Audiences wept, laughed, wrote letters. Strangers thanked me for making them feel less alone. I had tapped into something deeper than entertainment. It frightened me a little, because now I had responsibility. But I did not flinch. I pressed on. The gold rush, the circus, city lights. Each more ambitious, more precise. In City Lights, I returned to the Tramp, this time in love, silent in a world that was beginning to talk. The studios had embraced sound, dialogue was everywhere, but I resisted. I believed that words would clutter what the face could express, so I made City Lights silent, even in the age of microphones. And it worked. The ending, that look, that question, that trembling smile, it still haunts people. It haunts me. The world changed fast, faster than I liked. By the mid-1930s, sound was king. But I still had one more Tramp story in me. Modern Times. A satire on industry, on progress, on how the gears of the machine can grind down the soul. We laugh when he's caught in the cogs, but the laughter hides a scream. Modern Times was my farewell to the Tramp. I didn't say it aloud, but I knew. The world had become too loud, too fast. There was no more room for his quiet rebellion. And so, I let him walk off into the distance, silhouetted against uncertainty. Then came The Great Dictator, my most dangerous film. The world stood on the edge of madness. Hitler rose and people asked, should we laugh? I said we must, but we must also speak. So for the first time, I gave the Tramp a voice. Not a mumble or a whistle, but a voice that shook. A barber mistaken for a tyrant. A final speech that cracked with rage and hope. Some called it naive. Others called it treason. I called it necessary. But America was shifting. The land that once welcomed me with lights and cheers now looked at me with suspicion. They called me a communist. They dragged my name through newspapers and courtrooms. I was not a red. I was a humanist. But nuance dies quickly in a fire. My private life was always public. My marriages, my mistakes, my foolish choices, all there, printed in ink and mockery. I married young women, too young by some standards. I was called a predator, a pervert, a hypocrite. I answered as best I could, sometimes with silence, sometimes with shame. But the work remained. It was pure. It was mine. And as long as I could hold a camera, I would speak with it. Still, the winds turned. In 1952, I sailed to England for the premiere of Limelight. While at sea, I received word. My re-entry permit to the United States had been revoked. I was exiled, cast out from the land I had helped define. And so, I settled in Switzerland, with Una, my final love, my rock. She gave me peace and children and laughter that had nothing to do with film. I was old now, slower, but not done. That's where this chapter ends. Not in the spotlight, but in the shadows behind the stage. Watching the curtain fall, knowing I had more to say. And in the distance, I could still hear the echo of a cane tapping along a silent road. He was never far, not really. They say exile is a silence, but my silence was filled with memory. Switzerland, for all its peace and beauty, felt like a theater without an audience. The mountains were too still, the air too polite, and yet I found something there. Not joy exactly, but stillness. Una, my wife, was the constant I had never known. She was 3 decades younger than me, and yet she gave me the grounding of a century. Her eyes did not flinch when they looked at me, not from fame, nor scandal, nor age. Our children grew like flowers in quiet sunlight. Geraldine, Michael, Josephine, each one a miracle to a man who had once slept on the floors of workhouses. I would watch them play and think, perhaps I did not fail after all. But I missed film. Missed the click of the projector, the smell of nitrate, the rough texture of ideas becoming images. In Switzerland, I still wrote. I paced rooms, spoke scenes aloud to no one. In those halls, the Tramp still walked. In my dreams, he never aged. In 1967, after a long silence, I returned with A Countess from Hong Kong. It was not a success. Critics sharpened their knives. They said I had lost my touch. Perhaps I had. Or perhaps the world had lost its patience for tenderness. It didn't matter. I had said what I needed to say, and yet fate, or irony, had more in store. In 1972, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences invited me back to America. After 20 years of exile, I crossed the ocean again. I was old now. My hands trembled, my back curved. But when I stepped onto that stage in Los Angeles, the ovation lasted over 12 minutes. 12 minutes of applause. They stood for the man they once banished. I smiled, nodded, cried. Not for them, but for the boy who once danced for pennies, for the man who had spoken without sound, for the ghost of the Tramp who had never left the screen. The honor was not just an award, it was a homecoming, a pardon without words. In those final years, I watched the world change yet again. Wars flared and faded. Youth marched, then aged. Cameras shrank, screens multiplied. But always, people laughed. That never changed. And as long as there is laughter, there is hope. I was knighted in 1975 by Queen Elizabeth. Sir Charles Chaplin, they called me. The title felt distant, almost comical. A man who once swept backstage floors now wore medals on his coat. But titles were never my pursuit. Not Sir, not Mr., just Charlie. My body weakened. I walked slower, slept more, spoke less. But inside I still heard music, that inner score that had always guided my scenes. I still imagined gags, still envisioned how a character might stumble into love or fall out of grace. Sometimes, at night, I would sit by the window and imagine the tramp, alone, as always, walking into the distance, back slightly hunched, cane spinning, shoes oversized, dignity intact. That was the version of me I wanted remembered. Not the lawsuits, not the scandal, not the politics, but the man who believed that laughter could be noble, that sadness could be beautiful, that silence could thunder louder than speeches. I died on Christmas Day, 1977, in my sleep. A fitting end, perhaps. The curtain falling gently. I was 88 years old. Una was by my side. They buried me in Corsier-sur-Vevey, in a quiet grave with no great fanfare. The press printed obituaries. Filmmakers offered tributes. And then, as always, the world moved on. But I believe pieces of me linger. In every tilt of a hat. In every stumble played just right. In every glance to the camera that says, "We're in this together, aren't we?" That is where I remain. Not in statues or names on buildings, but in motion, in light, in the flicker of frames moving too fast to see, but slow enough to feel. So if you ever find yourself alone in a darkened theater and a figure appears, small, bent, stubbornly cheerful, that's me. Tip your hat, and I'll tip mine back.